Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dialectic. In this episode, I wanted to record a quick idea that I had. It's something I've been thinking about a lot. I've run it by a handful of friends and coworkers, and it's been pretty well received, so I wanted to share it with you all and see if maybe I could get some broader feedback and maybe spread the idea if you all think it's good enough. It's not exactly breaking news that the police and civilian relations seem to be pretty tense at the moment. With the death of George Floyd, it seemed to be a bit of a tipping point for a lot of Americans. I don't want to get too much into that because what I have to offer in this particular episode isn't really directly related, but it does tie in a bit. After George Floyd's death, I realized that there was an existing and growing what you might call fissure between police and the public. I started seeing a lot of people on social media posting about defunding the police and professing their hatred or distrust for the police. And the other thing is that you see a lot of anecdotes spreading far and wide on social media. And these anecdotes have basically replaced data. It's one of the many reasons I've been just railing against social media lately. That's probably for another time. But then all of this got me thinking, why is it that I don't dislike or distrust the police? Now, if you're ideologically or racially motivated, you're probably thinking something along the lines of, well, it's because you're white and police aren't profiling you or targeting you. And perhaps there is some truth to that, as there usually is to most claims. But if that's the framework within which you're listening to this, I gotta be honest, I don't think that I'm gonna be able to offer you much. I hope you'll listen, but I'm just not going down that road today. Anyway, I started thinking about why it is I don't distrust the police, and in fact, I rather appreciate them. Part of the reason for this is that I have a strong authority moral foundation, which is to say that I respect authority, and when I see people disrespecting authority, it violates that moral foundation, and I see it as wrong. But besides that, one other reason I thought is that I know several police officers. I know state police, I know local police. Now, this personal knowledge I have may be biased because most of them are Christians who I met in church, so they could be on the higher end of the imagined bell curve of corrupt versus noble police, but certainly it helps to shape a positive view knowing a handful personally. And then this train of thought led me to think about my neighbor who happens to be a sheriff. Now, I've actually never met him, but he often drives by when I'm out in my yard. And sometimes he waves at me, and sometimes I'll wave at him. And I started thinking, is it the fact that he's my neighbor that makes me like or trust him? And then I thought, well, no, because I've never met him, and I don't particularly like people I don't know and haven't met. And to add to that, I have neighbors I wave at, and they don't wave back. And I've never met those neighbors, and I really don't like them, mostly because they don't wave back at me. So it made me realize, it isn't that the sheriff is my neighbor that makes me like and trust him, it's that he waves at me, even though I've never actually met him. So then this made me start thinking, okay, apart from my neighbor who waves, and then the handful of police I know personally, my only other experience with police is either neutral or negative. For example, being pulled over for speeding. So if I only had neutral or negative encounters, well, of course I'd have a negative view of police. Now add to that already negative view the nonstop mainstream media narrative amplified endlessly by social media, and you have the makings of a pretty believable narrative. So how do you counter a believable narrative? Well, you counter a narrative with reality. The only way you can do this is by creating cognitive dissonance, by pitting a narrative against true reality. So then what is the reality that breaks that narrative? Well, I'd like to offer a small solution to a very large and complex problem. One way for us to break the narrative is to simply start waving at police officers. And in turn, for police officers to start waving to civilians. Hear me out. If you're on the defund the police side, you're probably thinking that this is an insultingly small idea. And if you want to defund the police and overturn the system, then yeah, this is probably not for you. But if you're reasonable and wanting to see and make meaningful change, then this is a place for you, and I mean you personally, to start. And if you're a police officer, you might be thinking, okay, well, I just saw my third drug addict overdose in front of me this week. You really expect me to wave to complete strangers, some of whom want to actually harm me? And to that I say, yes, I do. And here's why. You, police officer listening, are no stranger to responsibility. Every day you risk your life to protect society for a fairly low salary considering that risk. I'm offering you an additional responsibility and an additional sacrifice to add to that already long list. Wave. Wave to the people you see every day when you make your rounds in a neighborhood. Show people you're a friend and a protector and not a villain and a predator. Counter the narrative with reality, the reality that you know is true. And likewise, civilians, show the police that you're a neighbor and not a criminal. Wave to them as a gesture of thanks for protecting you. Just take a second and think about the psychological ramifications of signaling with your hand that you're a friend and not an enemy. To further defend my idea, I'd like to make a psychological analogy. If you lived in a filthy house full of clutter and chaos, you wouldn't burn down the house and rebuild it. That would be a solution, but it wouldn't be the right solution. I mean, you could do that, and for a while, maybe it would be clean. But if you don't address the psychological and behavioral problems, then the house will quickly become unlivable again. So instead, what do? Well, you start small, with a minimal task. You aim low. You make your bed. And every day, that then leads to cleaning up your room a bit more, and then hopefully this extends to the whole house. This is my solution that I'm offering you, a simple hand gesture. What I'm offering is a minimum step to repair the relationships and rebuild the trust between police and civilians. Psychologically, I'm suggesting we all make our beds. What I'm not doing is suggesting that this will solve all of the problems we have. But in a world where broad sweeping change and tearing down the system is what's being called for, I really think there's a market for aiming low, and I'm happy to fill it. So, that's my idea. To simply wave. Now, I know this idea warrants and borderline begs for criticism, and I do welcome it. I'd rather have a meaningful discussion about how to make meaningful change than see another defaced statue in the name of social justice. So please, if you agree, share the video, and if you disagree, leave a comment. Or, you know what, if you agree, leave a comment too, for that matter. Or hit me up on Twitter. The link is going to be in the description. And I'd like to hear why you agree or disagree. And again, if you did find this idea worthy of sharing, please do, because I think the only way this really works is basically to scale it up. So, thank you everybody. I appreciate you listening, and I will talk to you next time.